The sage from South Central. Others call me the czar of common sense, but you can call me Larry Elder. And you're invited to join me tonight, starting at 7, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Dan and Amy, good morning. And yesterday, the square-off between the Trump administration representative, and the D.C. press corps, which is a daily occurrence, this time featured Stephen Miller, policy advisor and speechwriter, against usual suspect CNN's Jim Acosta, arguing about the president's immigration reform proposal that was rolled out in conjunction with Senators Cotton and Perdue that would limit legal immigration and create a merit-based system to give prioritization to high-skilled English-speaking independent immigrants the world over. And this was part of the exchange.
And a way to get points is to speak English.
Yeah, it wants to build a wall. You want to bring about a sweeping change to
surely, Jim, you don't actually think that a wall affects green card policy. You couldn't possibly believe that, do you? I mean, I want to be serious, Jim. Do you really at CNN not know the difference between green card policy and illegal immigration?
Sir,
you really don't know that?
Cuban immigrant. He came to this country in 1962, right before the Cuban Missile Crisis, and obtained a green card. Yes. People who immigrate to this country can eventually. People who immigrate to this country not through Ellis Island,
Jim, as a factual question,
ways do obtain a green card at some point. They do it through a lot of hard work, and yes, they may learn English as a second language later on in life.
But
this whole notion of they could learn, they have to learn English before they get to the United States. Are we just going to bring in people from Great Britain and Australia?
Jim, I have to honestly say, I am shocked at your statement that you think that only people from Great Britain and Australia would know English. It reveals your cosmopolitan bias to a shocking degree that in your mind, this is an amazing moment. This is an amazing moment that you think only people from Great Britain or Australia would speak English is so insulting to millions of hardworking immigrants who do speak English from all over the world.
And in a related story, Nintendo has capitulated to complaints about its new game, Super Mario Odyssey.
Yeah.
Because Mario is featured in a sombrero and a poncho. His stereotypical look prompted cries of cultural appropriation, so they removed the offending look from the box art and so forth to get ahead of another scolding by Jim Acosta. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Steve Cortes, Fox News contributor, former head of Trump's Hispanic Advisory Council. Steve, thanks for joining us. So is Jim Acosta right that Emma Lazarus's poem was actually a federal statute and that what Trump proposes to do is extinguish Lady Liberty's torch?
No, it probably won't surprise you to hear me say that won't happen at all. That is not the case. And Jim Acosta, by the way, has to me just totally crossed the line, in terms of being an advocate. He's an opposition advocate against the administration. He doesn't even pretend to be a reporter anymore, and he certainly showed that to the whole country yesterday. To me, the worst line of reasoning that he pursued and that the left went crazy with, all day afterward, was that this is a race-based policy, as if speaking English equals a race, and that is not the case. More people in India speak English than do in England. More people in the Philippines speak English than do in Australia. So speaking English is a skill. It's a skill that's important, I think, for immigrants to this country, a skill that people like my father, an immigrant, had to master. He didn't master it all that well, by the way, but still learned enough to make a living and raise a family in the United States. So it's not a racist policy. It's a sensible policy. I think, listen, I love immigration, but we have to admit we're not doing it right now. And the reason I say that is the majority or close to the majority of immigrant-headed households are on some form of welfare. Now, that was not the case in the previous age of great migration. This is the second biggest wave ever. In the previous one, the Industrial Revolution, the percentage was 0% were on welfare because there was no safety net. So we can either, as a country, in my opinion, we can either have a massive social safety net or we can have massive unskilled immigration, but we cannot have both.
Well, don't you think cutting immigration would hurt this country? I mean, low-wage jobs are needed to make America work. Think of the agriculture industry, the construction industry, meat packing industry. They're mostly people that came over to this country, some legally, some illegally, but those positions are needed and they're not being filled by Americans.
Right. And listen, I understand that that is the reality now. However, I think the reason they're not being filled by Americans primarily is most Americans respond very sensibly to incentives. And right now, without working, particularly if you're on disability, which unfortunately is relatively easy to get, and a lot of fraud and corruption going on in disability, if you're on a combination of disability, if you have children and you're on welfare for your children, aid to families with dependent children, food stamps, it all adds up to a wage, effectively, that is better than many of these jobs. So people make the very rational choice of why take a terrible job of picking produce in the field versus making roughly the same amount of money by doing nothing. So what is the answer? The answer, I think, is to get those wages higher. And if you didn't flood America with 1 million low-skilled workers, again, I want immigrants. I would disagree with the administration, by the way, in terms of cutting the net number of immigrants. I don't agree with them on that, but I want them to be more skilled. And if we do that, and we grow our economy, and we raise wages, even for those very low-skilled jobs, my bet is that Americans of lower skill would then take them. For instance, we know right now in Chicago, according to the University of Illinois UIC study, 47% of black men aged 20 to 25 are neither in the workforce nor in school. Now, that is just a tragedy. It's also a bomb that continues to explode in our city every day. Part of why they're not working, though, is there aren't jobs available to them if they're low-skilled. There aren't jobs available to them that will pay a wage that will incentivize them. So I believe that part of the reason for that, and this is the only reason, I'm not blaming immigrants for that situation solely, but I do think that the fact that we take in 1 million immigrants a year, the vast majority of whom are low-skilled, is clearly, in my view, depressing wages at the lower end of the pay scale. And that's particularly problematic, ironically, for blacks and Hispanics in the United States, the people the left claims to want to protect.
I want to go back to the English matter and what you were talking about with respect to, English being essentially the global language of business. This is important because Miller was okay, but he kind of got he got defensive about effectively being called a racist and suggesting this was a racist policy by Acosta. But this is always opportunities to flip the script on the left, it seems to me. And one of the things Acosta is doing, and those that cry racism are doing, is engaging in the bigotry they're suggesting Trump and others who support, not entirely like you, I have problems with some of this too, like the artificial numbers, but support sensible immigration reform, support a merit-based system that doesn't preclude low-skilled workers, but prioritizes those that have the most to contribute and that are the most independent. The idea is this: you don't want people to succeed. You have no expectations for people. No expectations for people. That's why you don't want to require them to speak English, even though, as Miller pointed out, speaking English is a requirement to be a naturalized citizen. But you don't want to put people in the best position to succeed. You have no expectations for them. You're happy. You're fine with them being a dependent of the state. You're fine with having their soul crushed, just like so many Americans have through the dependency, because you're really interested, as you said with Acosta, in advocating for a particular ideology and a particular movement and a particular political party, not for these people. And point of fact, by demanding that individuals meet expectations, we're putting them in the best position they can be to get what they want in coming to this country, which is success and independence and financial wherewithal and a feeling of self-worth that comes from all of the aforementioned. It seems to me we should be positioning ourselves as the proponents of fulfillment for people that want to come to this country and do good and do well.
Right. No, listen, I think you're exactly right. And sadly, the left, I think we have to be careful about impugning motives, because I hate it when they do it to us. But I do think that there's a reasonable case to be made that many on the left, particularly those in power, whether it's media or in political office, are tacitly fine with a large dependency base out there that they believe they can depend on to support them every single election. For example, we have almost 50 million Americans on food stamps. That is the entire west coast of the United States. That's California, Oregon, and Washington, all of those states on food stamps. I mean, I think that's an outrage. Now, it's getting better, thankfully, under Donald Trump. It's starting to tick the other way. Not enough, but it's starting to. But that's not what food stamps were designed for.
Well, right. And to your point, then right, you're right. Don't assume the motive, but ask the question: why don't you have expectations for these individuals? Right. Why no requirements? Right. There are requirements for everything in life, for schooling, for jobs, for your kids that you parent. Everybody has requirements if you want to obtain something. Why no expectations, Jim Acosta and others of his ilk?
Right. Well, and I think, too, regarding immigration, here's the problem. What the left tries to do is say, if you question immigration, you're a racist, right? I mean, there's no number. I once asked when I was on MSNBC during one of the presidential debates, off air, I asked the panel, I said, tell me what level of immigration I can advocate that won't make me a racist. In other words, what's the number, right? And they told me, honestly, there is none. I said, okay, so you're for open borders. I'm like, all right, that's a reasonable position. I mean, not reasonable in my view, but you can make a case for that. But be honest about it. But then once we go on air, of course, they won't say that, right?
Well, there's no distinguishing between legal and illegal, right? Not by Jim Acosta,
crucial. Right? Which is of course crucial. Look, becoming an American citizen is hard. I think it should get easy. I frankly do. I think if you're skilled, if you speak English, if you believe in our values, I actually, and again, this is one point I disagree with the administration on. I think we actually should, if anything, have more immigration because our birth rate's declining. More people equals more prosperity. People are always a gift in every sense. So I want more people in America, but we have a right to decide what kind of people, and that's not xenophobic, it's not racist, it's sensible, it's fair. So I want it to become easier to become an American. Right now, again, for the right people, right now, and by the way, when I say right people, that's not code word. That doesn't mean white. That doesn't mean British, okay? It means skilled, speak English, and love our country and our values.
No, you're for both kinds of immigrants, Australians and British.
Right. By the way, what an insult that he said that in that building. The First Lady of the United States speaks wonderful English. And
she
from neither
speaks
of those
7 languages.
I wish Stephen Miller would have said, can you hold on for 1 second while I go grab Melania?
Yeah, right.
I'm going to show you perhaps the most prominent immigrant in America who isn't from the Anglo world.
All right. Well, thanks so much for your insight. I have to tell you. I'm heavily medicated, Steve Cortes. So. All
right, and then we'll have to tackle another time getting people in this country who are violent criminals and don't belong here, that are illegal, out of the country, as well as Northwestern University professors who are violent criminals. Steve Cortes, Fox News contributor, former Trump Hispanic Advisory Council boss. Steve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan